Right now is a good time for teams with a lot of cap space. It's an even better time for you because you're watching the show. And welcome into a new episode of Zero Technique Football Podcast. I'm your co-host, Ryan Stern. Joined with me, as always, Derek Mountain. Hopefully, we'll be joined at some point tonight by Ric Serritella from the NFL Draft Bible. We had something worked out, so hopefully we'll be able to get him on. But even if we don't, we've got plenty to talk about. Derek, we talked over the past couple of weeks about some of these players that are potentially going to get franchise tagged, some of these players that are going to get cut, and we're starting to see the the aftermath of some of that.
Yeah, we've been preparing for this. I mean, a lot of really good players every year get franchised. It wasn't that different yesterday with the deadline happening. It's still a really good class, though. Like today, we saw a lot of cap casualties, and it's going to happen until next Wednesday is the deadline that these teams need to be under the cap. There's a lot of good free agents out there, a lot of studs out there, more so than any other year, I'd say. But in terms of tier 2 and tier 3 guys that are still starters and big-time contributors, there are going to be more of them this year.
You know, that's what happens when you have a league that tends to have a 10 to 20% increase in salary cap on a year-to-year basis, and now there's an 8% decrease. At the time most of these contracts were signed, we didn't know that there was going to be a global pandemic that was going to affect how sports were played over the past year. And it's crazy to think that we're now coming up on 1 year.
Literally like today. Yeah.
I think this Friday, which is the 12th, is the day that Rudy Gobert we found out Rudy Gobert tested positive, and subsequently the entire world shut down afterwards. I mean, we've all said, yeah, there's been a crazy year, and now it actually is a year. It really is unbelievable.
Yeah, this year will be hopefully brighter days are ahead.
Yeah, and I know they announced today that the Texas Rangers are going to have full capacity to open up the Major League Baseball season. That's Texas for you.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's different than the Northeast, that's for sure.
That it is. And speaking of the Northeast and Texas, when you have to combine those two, both of us are fans of NFC East teams, and the NFC East teams that resides in Texas, they locked up their quarterback for at least 3 years, because it looks like there's a potential out after 3. But he signs a 4-year, $160 million contract, could be worth up to $164. Is Dak Prescott a $40 million a year quarterback?
I mean, we know he's not, but Jerry waited 2 years too long, and he played his hand. I mean, Dak played his hand perfectly, despite even coming off a compound fracture in his ankle. It's the way I think about quarterbacks. If you're at the Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins line, and Dak's clearly above that, I mean, you're going to get paid. Teams are not, even if Dak might not be that Super Bowl winning quarterback, which I'm not sure if that's fair to say or not. He hasn't really had a fair shake since his rookie year. So we'll see if they can build around him. It's going to be tough around that number. But if you have a guy of that caliber, you have to lock him up. You don't really have a choice. What's the alternative for Dallas?
Yeah, the alternative would have been a 2022 third-round compensatory pick.
Or franchise him again. That helps no one.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at, and they could have had, last year, they could have had Dak for 4 years at probably around $34 or $35 million a year. I think if that was offered, he's probably taking that. But that's what happens when you have a franchise tag for 2 years in a row on a quarterback, especially in a year where Patrick Mahomes signed $50 million or $500 million contract. It's going to skew numbers. And again, I don't think anyone actually thinks that Dak Prescott is a $40 million a year quarterback, but it's all about when you become a free agent, not how you become a free agent. And it was the right year. There's no other top 10 quarterbacks that are going to be out on the market. And I mean, Dak Prescott, for you say what you want about him, he's 15 games over 500 for his career. He is a really good quarterback. But now the biggest thing is, how are the Cowboys going to build around him? Because now the Cowboys have the number one highest paid quarterback in the league. They have the highest paid running back in the league. They have the highest paid wide receiver in the league.
And they just had to restructure Tyron Smith, Lyle Collins, and Zach Martin today, who are all very good football players. But besides Lyle Collins, they're declining. They have seen brighter days on that offensive line, but that's what you have to do. The Cowboys have to find a way to get that number under the cap next week, and it's going to be tough moving forward. It's like you said, there's a really top-heavy roster.
Yeah, and we're going to take a look at some of the players who were cut, and now with this contract, it really takes the Cowboys out of the free agency market, probably. I mean, unless they're able to figure out more restructures, and that, I mean, restructures are going to cost you at some point.
I don't think there's a huge misconception. Restructuring is not taking less money; it's pushing it back. It is, and when you do that and you want to cut ties, it makes it a lot harder, and you accumulate that dead money like a Carson Wentz or Jared Goff that we saw this year. So, restructuring isn't necessarily always a good move, and the good teams avoid it because of that. I mean, you want to pay your cash up front as best as you can. Just sometimes you can't, especially this year, half the league is over the cap, and they have to find ways to go around that.
Yeah, and we did see a bunch of players get franchise tagged over the past couple of days. Most of them weren't necessarily surprises. I guess the biggest surprise was Cam Robinson. But I mean, that wasn't even a huge surprise. But we saw other players. I guess the biggest surprise to me was probably the Saints franchise tagging safety Marcus Williams.
Yeah,
because then you're guaranteed that it's slightly over $10 million a year to a safety when you are that far over the cap as it is. It's only going to make it that much tougher to get under the actual cap. We saw Leonard Williams get tagged by the Giants, Marcus May tagged by the Jets. Allen Robinson tagged by the Bears, although I think there's still a lot of rumors going around that don't be surprised if you see a tag and trade with Allen Robinson. And then you got to look at today was the cut day. We saw players like John Brown in Buffalo, Kevin Zeitler with the Giants, Kenny Vaccaro and Malcolm Butler with the Titans. And this is just the beginning. Yeah.
We're going to get a whole week of this. It's going to be more of this, more of these cap casualties happening throughout the week. We said it before the show even started. The Rams, the Saints, the Eagles are still hovering around that $30 million over the cap. They're about $30 million over the cap right now. A lot of other teams, I think another handful of teams are still over the cap, and other teams, you still need another 8 or 10 million free in cap space to sign any pending rookie class. So it's not like, oh, we're under the cap, the work's done. But yeah, you try to make as much room as you can before this free agency class, because as we talked about, it's going to be some nice tier 2, tier 3 guys that we need to look out for in this free agency. And if you did prepare properly, like some of these teams we'll get into today, like Indy, we talked about New England last week, we've talked about the Jets and the Jags, they can really separate this offseason. They can really make up a lot of ground and make their teams a lot better immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the start of free agency does begin a week from today, on March 17th, and there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to be struggling to get to. they announced. I know we were wondering if it was going to be 180. Is it going to be 185? And they split the difference. It was announced that the cap this year is going to be 182.5.
Yeah, that's tough.
which is an 8% decrease from last year.
I think a lot of people too, after Dak signed that huge deal, everyone was like, "Oh, Jerry must know that it must be close to high 180s, 190 number," and that was a really optimistic view, and it wasn't. It was closer to 180 than we thought. So, yeah, it's gonna be tough slugging for some of these teams.
That it is. All right, so let's get into our off-season preview. Again, we've been going in order of the draft. If you want to check out the archives, make sure you subscribe to Backsports page on YouTube, or you can check out backsportspage.com. All of the archives to the show are going to be up there. It's a great way to find shows that you've missed. It's also a great way to check out the other amazing shows that Backsports page has to offer you. So this is our fourth week of our off-season outlook. We've gone through teams up until we went through number 19 in the draft with Washington last week. We did skip 18 because that was the second pick for the Dolphins. Next week we will wrap up and add in the teams that don't have first-round draft picks as well. All right, so let's hop in. We are at number 20, and that is the Chicago Bears. And again, we found out yesterday that they were going to tag Allen Robinson. What does their offseason outlook look like right now in terms of cap and free agents?
Well, after tagging Robinson, they're now $17 million over the cap. So they made it even tougher on themselves. I mean, and we'll get into it. You have to keep players like Allen Robinson around, but he's obviously disgruntled. So we'll see how they navigate that situation. And then their upcoming free agents. Mitch Trubisky is a free agent. They've already cut Bobby Massey and Buster Skrine. Cordero Patterson's a free agent, along with Jermaine Irfetti and starting safety Tashawn Gibson. So not losing too much in this free agency class. I don't see any of them being re-signed candidates. But yeah, I mean, they don't have a quarterback now. I mean, it's Nick Foles, and that's it. If they really want to ride into next season with Nick Foles as their starter.
Yeah. So I know you brought up Mitchell Trubisky. You don't see any possibility that he's brought back into the mix. He wasn't necessarily terrible over the second half of the season last year. He's definitely not what they were expecting when they took him at number 2 overall and passed up on quarterbacks you may have heard of, Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes.
Well, the way I look at it, I mean, Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy were brought back for one more year. A desperation move, in my opinion, but that's what Bears ownership wanted to do. And they kind of, in my opinion, I think they have to cut ties, admit that Trubisky's a sunk cost. They can't proceed next year with him as their starting quarterback. And I think Trubisky is fine as a bottom 10, bottom 5 starter, high tier backup, but they got to 8-8 this year. That's really their ceiling with Mitch Trubisky as the quarterback. He's fine, but he doesn't really give you much zest on offense. He doesn't create too much excitement. So, I mean, they have to think outside the box, whether that's Mariota, James Winston, a trade with Sam Darnold. And, I mean, there's the Russ sweepstakes where he was one of the 4 destinations that he would pick. They felt like probably the one team that stuck out like a sore thumb that he one of his destinations that he would want. But if I was Ryan Pace and I knew my seat was as hot as it is, I would do anything in my power to try to get Russ. I don't know how that's possible with the roster. And at pick 20 and with Nick Foles, Seattle wouldn't really have an answer right away at quarterback, giving up Russ to Chicago, which would be the biggest problem. But I would give up 5 first-round picks for Russ. I mean, considering the QB luck that they have had in Chicago, I mean, wouldn't you? I mean,
since Jim Harbaugh, they haven't had a quarterback who has, I think, who has had more than 3 winning seasons in their career as a Bear. I mean, it's unbelievable. So you brought up a couple different situations in terms of quarterback. The news when I had heard about Allen Robinson being tagged, my first instinct was they were going to use it as part of a tag and trade to acquire a quarterback and use Allen Robinson as bait for that team to give up an asset.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I mean, you don't. I mean, what if you go to the Jets and you say, "All right, we'll give you Allen Robinson, and we'll throw in a second-round draft pick, and you give us Sam Darnold"? Are the Jets going to turn that down? Because now that would give them 3 first-round draft picks. They can take their quarterback at 2, still be able to fill other holes at 20 and 23, and they get a premier wide receiver in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I just think with the Bears, it's tough. So, like, I get that Allen Robinson doesn't want to play there, and I think the franchise tag needs to be abolished immediately for guys like Allen Robinson, who should hit the open market and actually see what their value is. Because what it was for receivers, I think that it was around 16 or 17 million, right? Allen Robinson would get more on the open market easily. Even in a cap crunch year, he's borderline top 5 receiver.
Because there are enough teams that have cap space that would sign him to at least an Amari Cooper, an Amari Cooper type contract. He would get that easily.
Exactly. But like I said, with Pace and Nagy, they got to win. I mean, that's why I think when you bring back these GMs and head coaches that know they're on the hot seat, it just breeds desperation and they make desperate moves. And not saying tagging Allen Robinson is a desperate move. It's not. It's good business. And I think a rebuilding team and a rebuilding front office and head coach would be on board with a tag and trade, which is why I was pretty shocked that Detroit didn't tag Kenny Golladay. Because at the least, I think you're getting a 3rd rounder this year versus waiting for a comp 3rd round next year. But with Allen Robinson, I mean, he's by far your best offensive player. He's the only thing remotely close to a star on that offense. I mean, after that, it's Dave Montgomery, Darnell Mooney, Cole Kmet's a nice player. The offensive line's a train wreck. You don't have a quarterback. I think they almost have to keep Robinson if they want to be somewhat competitive next year.
Yeah, and it was funny. It popped up on my memories, and what you had just said reminded me of the one day a couple years ago that in Jerry Reese's last hurrah with the Giants, he signed Janoris Jenkins, traded for Olivier Vernon, and signed Snacks Harrison all in one day. And I mean, that's like that. There's your breeding desperation move right there. Just trying to do whatever you can.
Did you see Jason Fitzgerald at Over the Cap? He does a great job. It's such a good resource. Did you see the tweet, the graphic he had of free agent spending and like team success, and like bottom right? So
yes.
And bottom right was free agent spending and team record, and all of them it was the Bengals, the Jets, the Jags, the Raiders, and it makes sense. You can't build a team through free agency. I mean, especially when you're paying top dollar, usually depending on the position. I mean, sometimes it's smart bets. Like if Allen Robinson or Kenny Golladay, for example, was going to hit the open market, if a team like the Patriots who have the money give him 18 to 20 million a year, you know what you're going to get out of Kenny Golladay. He's a Pro Bowl caliber receiver. He's young. I mean, he's a 1A in just about every single offense in the league. But there are other teams like the Raiders who you see they get their hands on some money and they want to make the next step immediately. And they signed LaMarcus Joyner. They signed Trent Brown. They signed Carl Nassib. They signed Marcus Mariota. A bunch of moves that they already regret. Tyrell Williams. I mean, and to compile it with their bad drafting, I mean, that's when you get. That's where they are right now. They're a team scrambling and cutting all these guys. you don't build your team through free agency. You supplement it. It's how you supplement depth. There are maybe some starters and some key pieces you can work for. There's one guy. Yeah, exactly. Maybe there are a few guys that you look at, you have your eyes on in each free agency class, or maybe one superstar that you have your eye on to really put your team over the top. But the good teams don't spend that much money in free agency, as you see in this graph. They just don't. It's through the draft. It always has been, and it really always will be.
Yeah, and the two teams that always stuck out to me in terms of building through the draft and not spending with free agency are the Steelers and the Packers, and they're just the two teams that have really bred the most consistency over the past 2-3 decades.
Yep.
I mean, how often? Mike Tomlin has been there how many years and has not had a losing season. And
it's incredible.
And they don't spend anything on free agency. It's all done through the draft there.
No, and that's, I mean, I got my first taste at it as an Eagles fan in 2011. The Dream Team.
The Dream Team.
Namdi Asama, DRC, Vince Young. I mean, it was all the heavy, Jason Babin, like all the biggest names came to Philly, and the next season they flopped 7-9, and it was the biggest disappointment. And it's just, it was a lesson. It was a hard lesson to learn, but it will always ring true in the NFL. Cheap and young talent are always going to surpass these free agents that are hitting top dollar in their second and third contracts. I mean, and usually they're not even the best scheme fits most of the time. They're just taking the most money. So that is a lesson that will ring true in the NFL, that has rang true in the NFL for sure.
Yeah. So if you're looking at the graphic right now, where you want to be is you want to be in the upper left quadrant. Where you don't want to be is the lower right quadrant. And as the furthest down and the furthest to the right you go, that's the worst. And I mean, look at that team that's all the way down there, the furthest down and the furthest to the right. I mean, the New York Jets. And it's really not a surprise when you look at over the past 6-7 years that the Jets are in the position that they're in.
And I mean, you look at the positions that they invested in: Lev Bell,
right,
aging running back, over $50 million. CJ Mosley, $17 million a year for an inside linebacker. Rashad Perriman last year, double-digit million, $10-11 million for, was he a third option on a good offense? I mean, he had his moments in Tampa Bay last year, but I mean, it's just reckless spending by these bad teams, and there's a reason they stay bad. And the NFL sells hope and optimism better than any league. And these teams are the same teams with a ton of cap space every year. And we're going to get all these free agents. We have the top picks, blah, blah, blah. Get your season tickets now. And I do think Jets and Jaguars fans should be excited for a reason, but they can't have the same mentality going into free agency as they have had.
Yeah, and I mean, those would have been really good signings in 1994. With the running and the inside linebacker. I mean, back when those, I mean, it really isn't that far off where those two positions were the positions that you needed to have. You needed to have that inside linebacker. You needed to have that established running game. And it's not part of today's NFL.
No, absolutely not.
All right, so now with the Bears, in terms of the draft, if they decide to just hold pat and they're there at pick 20, or they're getting close to, you're into the teens and one of the 5 quarterbacks has fallen, because I keep seeing, 5 quarterbacks going in the top 12.
Yeah, I find it hard to believe that Mac Jones is going to be a top 12 pick, but it's looking that way right now.
But I mean, if he goes 12, that means that's San Francisco. Maybe that opens up a potential for Jimmy Garoppolo to the Bears. But now we're hearing a lot of these rumors about Garoppolo going back to New England. That's pretty hot and heavy right now. Is Mac Jones the best option for the Bears in 2021, or is it somebody that could be on the free agency market?
If it was me, I just think Mac Jones, his play style isn't conducive to how
No.
Chicago is going to play. I mean, they're not a drop back team. They don't have a good offensive line, and he is all anticipation, pocket thrower. He's not going to extend plays. He's not going to create out of structure outside the pocket. And to play the Bears right now, you kind of have to. That's a prerequisite. At least Mitch could run and create a little bit. So to me, I think their best avenue is you look for maybe a one-year flyer, bridge quarterback. Maybe you take someone in the third or fourth round with some upside that you like. Whoever
Maybe a
that
Kellen Mond. I mean,
I was going to say Kellen Mond. A Davis Mills.
This is going to be a joke for the next month and a couple weeks, isn't it? Going to be with Kellen Mond, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where his stock is going to lie if people respect Chris Sims's opinion or not in NFL circles, but if you took him in like the fourth or fifth round, like in terms of athleticism, I wouldn't hate that for the Bears. But I think in terms of throwing, there are a lot of steps that need to be made, and you have him hold a clipboard for a year and practice, and you go from there. But at pick 20, I don't want to force anything. I would really look at offensive line. They really gotta. I mean, they already cut Bobby Massey. Effetti's gonna be a free agent. They get James Daniels back next year, which will be nice, but they really got to improve there.
Yeah, the name that really, if they're, and yes, offensive line to me is the way they would go. I would look to fill in, and we're hearing conflicting reports about Ryan Fitzpatrick about whether or not he really is going to come back next year or not. So some people are saying he's retiring, leaning towards retiring. Others are saying that he's definitely in for next year. I mean, he's a name that's going to be thrown out when anybody has any sort of quarterback vacancy, just because he's reliable.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a route, but Elijah Vera Tucker. I mean, how much does he make sense because of his versatility on the offensive line for a team like Chicago?
Yeah, that would be. I mean, the tackle. This is a good time to need a tackle at this range if you're the Bears. Or we talked about Washington last week. I mean, it's such a deep tackle class, and you're going to see 6 or 7 guys go in the first round. It's actually a sweet spot for the Bears, and they might even be in the position to maybe trade back a few spots and pick up another pick along the way.
Absolutely. All right. On to pick number 21, and it's a team that we've already seen active during off season, and that is the Indianapolis Colts. They were 11-5 last year, and they're sitting pretty coming into this off season.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what Chris Ballard does. I mean, he's been really patient at the quarterback spot. He made a move for Phillip Rivers last year, but they had a ton of cap space. It was a nice one-year flyer to take. He retires. He puts all his chips in the middle of the table to get Wentz at a affordable price in terms of draft capital and a decent cap number for Wentz. They still have $46 million in cap space, which is good for fourth most in the league. And the pending free agents that they have, T.Y. Hilton, Justin Houston, Danico Audrey, Xavier Rhodes, Malik Hooker, who was out for the year last year with a ruptured Achilles, as well as Marlon Mack. Zach Pascal is a restricted free agent. And who else? Anthony Walker is also a free agent. They're inside backer. So pretty good list. Definitely some re-sign candidates in there, I would think. And, I mean, they can be a serious player. To me, I think it's easy. I would put $22 million tomorrow in Trent Williams' pocket to play to play next to Quinn Nelson. I mean, the thought of that is just unbelievable. I hear Kenny Golladay, but to me, it's a run-first offense. I mean, does Carson Wentz, is he really going to maximize a Kenny Golladay? You get Michael Pittman last year. I would almost rather see them get a John Brown maybe for cheap, a decent value play. I would put all my eggs in the Trent Williams basket. I want to see it happen.
When we saw Carson Wentz at his best, it was when Alshon Jeffrey was at his best. And to me, you can see a lot of Michael Pittman in Alshon Jeffrey, but I think there also is a lot of Alshon Jeffrey in someone like a Kenny Golladay. Having those big physical receivers that are going to make the plays at the point of the catch, use the strong hands. I think it makes sense. And this is a team that already has a lot of really good pieces in place, and they're going to benefit from other teams who are going to have to let go of players. And they're, with the amount of cap room that they have, they're going to be able to make this. And right now, I think that this is the team to watch out for to make a couple really big splashes.
Yeah, I think Ballard's, he's really calculated. I don't think he's not reckless at all. He's really patient. They drafted really well. They make a nice calculated risk trading for DeForest Buckner last year, bring his cap number down and extend him. He was the best interior D lineman in football outside of Aaron Donald. He was such a force for them. If they don't go after Trent Williams or a Kenny Golladay, I think they could go after a premier edge. I could see them going after Carl Lawson, Romeo Okwara, or Hassan Reddick to fit along their front if they don't retain someone like Justin Houston or Danico Audrey. I think that's very within the realm of possibility to team up with DeForest Buckner, because at linebacker, they're really good. Darius Leonard, Bobby Okereke are about as good as it gets. I could see them being in the market for a corner, but at safety, Julian Blackmon was a really pleasant surprise from their third-round pick from Utah. They're really good in a lot of premium positions.
Yeah.
It's really just shoring up the roster and maybe getting one or two more big-time difference makers, and this team could be a real serious contender next year.
You said the name Bobby Okereke, and anytime I hear his name, all I can envision is at the draft in Nashville when Pat McAfee comes out on stage and he goes on his rant about how the Colts are just so superior to the Titans. And it is one of the ultimate sports rants that there ever has. And then the way that he announces Bobby Okereke's name, I can't think of him as an actual football player, because all I think of is Pat McAfee just going on this rant, and then, oh yeah, we drafted Bobby Okereke.
He's great.
Oh my God, he's gonna be a star. He
already is.
Sports media, but he is to the football diehards. He's gonna be a mainstream star really soon.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right. In terms of draft, this is a team that, again, I think that they're a good trade up candidate, because I think they're going to be able to fill in a lot of holes through free agency. They may not need to do a whole lot through the draft, and they may try and capitalize and move up just to capitalize on talent instead of to be quality instead of quantity.
What guys do you have in mind if they were to trade up, do you think?
It would be Rashawn Slater. It would be Christian Darrisaw, so someone like that. If they're here, maybe someone. I
could see one of the two corners too.
Yeah. Either Farley or Surtain, or they may not have to go up as high to get someone like a J.C. Horn, but they may be able to get up for one of those elite cornerbacks as well. Yeah, but the left tackles are where I would look at with either a Darrisaw or a Slater.
I'll throw a name out there too. If he were to fall in the teens, I could see them maybe making a play for Devonta Smith if they decide not to make a play receiver in the free agent market. And
let's go after the one guy who looks the most like Marvin Harrison and bring him back to Indianapolis.
Yeah, I think he complements Pittman.
Yeah,
they have two totally different skill sets, and you bring back Paris Campbell in the slot next year, and that is like a big time. That's a young and a big time receiving core to build around Wentz. And that's a cheap way to go about it if they do decide to part ways with T.Y. Hilton.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a ton of sense. Whether or not, because I know that they've been burned in the past by first round receivers, and they've actually had a lot more success with the guys drafted in rounds 2, 3, 4. But I mean, not everyone is Philip Dorsett.
Yeah. That wasn't a Ballard pick either. That was a Gregson pick. I mean, Ballard's drafted so well since he's been there. I mean, Indy fans, you're in very good hands.
I nailed the Philip Dorsett pick. So when we were doing I'm hoping to have a pretty big draft special the night before the draft, but for 6 years or so, I've had a great panel come on, and we do a mock draft of the first round. And that year, I had the Colts, and I picked Philip Dorsett with my pick, and everyone's like, "What? No, that's never going to happen." And bam, that was one of my prouder moments.
That was like 26 too. By that point, it's like a crapshoot.
28.
I was just like that. By that point, it's like impossible.
That it is. All right. So we're going to move on to a division rival of the Indianapolis Colts. Also finished at 11-5. They won the AFC South because of a tiebreaker, and that's the Tennessee Titans. This is a team that loses their offensive coordinator, Arthur Smith, to the head coaching job for the Atlanta Falcons. Now we're going to find out, was this offense really Arthur Smith, or is it really because of Derrick Henry? And there are a lot of people who are seeing that or are believing that it really is Arthur Smith and being able to utilize the play action pass because of having someone like a Derrick Henry there. And so what are we looking at for the offseason for the Tennessee Titans?
Well, they've been busy, as you noted. Yeah. They cut Kenny Vaccaro and Malcolm Butler today, 2 starters in their secondary. They cut Adam Humphries last week. Clowney's a free agent. Jonnu Smith was a tag candidate. They didn't tag him, so he'll hit the market. Desmond King, who they acquired midseason, he will be hitting the market, as well as linebacker Jayon Brown. So there's a lot of good football players. They've managed to free up about over $20 million in the past week. So right now they're $16.7 million under the cap right now. But I mean, that's a lot of good football players for them. This receiving core is really scarce right now. I mean, It's just AJ Brown.
Brown.
And you lose Arthur Smith, like you said. So to me, my questions are, can your offense be a top 5 offense like it has been the last 2 years? Can you somehow get it back to 2019 for this defense? I mean, those are 2 huge questions because they have personnel issues at a lot of spots on the football field.
All right, so this is obviously a team that we can see build through wide receiver in the draft. There's also, and we're already starting to see wide receivers being cut. Someone like a John Brown. I think John Brown makes a lot of sense. He's a good complement because, just like you said, with Michael Pittman and Devonta Smith, a completely different skill set between John Brown and an AJ Brown. Someone also like an Emmanuel Sanders. But there's also, and you know what, they can probably go through through free agency and through the draft because this is again a very loaded wide receiver class in the draft.
Yeah, you get like an Amari Rodgers or a Dwayne Eskridge in the 3rd round. I think that would be a decent avenue to go down. Someone you could put in the slot or you can move around on offense. That's just another weapon. But yeah, they can't they can't get any of these really tier one free agent guys, which is fine, but they're losing a lot. Pretty much all those guys I just named are starters. To me, they have to get something at edge. I don't know how, but they haven't been able to pressure the quarterback for the past 2 years, and they've swung and missed on Jadavian Clowney, Vic Beasley. I mean, going back a couple years, Javon Curse. I mean, it just seems like when they make these big splashes at defensive end, it never works.
Harold Landry's been okay.
He was a good pick. It's a good pick.
Yeah. But he hasn't been the dynamic pass rusher.
I think he's a great number two.
He's a great number two. He's terrific against run. He's one of the better run defending edges in which was part of his game coming out. And I don't think he was really drafted to be that
number one.
That number one, the Von Miller, someone like that. That's not who he is. He really has played very similar to the way he played at Boston College.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the avenue you go down, you try to get a Hassan Reddick for a 1 year prove it deal.
Yeah,
at like $8-9 million, and for that's a discount for a guy like Reddick the year he's coming off, and you get a little lucky. But other than that, I mean, if they don't hit free agency, I think 21 you have to look at Jalen Phillips, Kwity Paye, Gregory Rousseau. I mean, that it's not perfect, but they have to address that issue somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. That has to be their prime focus in either the draft or free agency. And to be honest, I think it has to be the draft, because there isn't going, at least right now, there isn't that rusher that's on the market. Again, maybe you like someone like a Hassan Reddick. I don't think Hassan Reddick is going to settle for the kind of money that Tennessee is going to be able to afford him to be able to afford. I think he's going to look somewhere in the 10 to 12 range, and that may put the Titans just out of reach.
Well, even like Quinn Jefferson, who got cut today, he's a nice rotational piece in the interior, and he can play outside. I mean, that's kind of what they're going to have to do, because like you said, they can't get a Carl Lawson. They can't get Romeo Okwara. They can't. I mean, maybe they get a guy like Marcus Golden, like a guy in his 30s that is declining, but he's still really productive. But yeah, anything short of that, I think at 22, they have to look in that direction. Other than that, I'm looking at the secondary too. I mean, it might be a little rich, but I think a Trayvon Moehrig at 22 would be a really nice player for them. He's really dynamic and really versatile, and he would help shore up that back end. It's just tough when you don't have a pass rush.
Right.
Sometimes these young D-backs who get thrown into the fire aren't ready. So, that might be a little bit too rich of a pick for them in the first round.
Yeah, and so I've seen him as high as like number 16 and as low as number 50. He is all over.
I love his talent.
Some of the boards. Yeah.
I think a really good team should scoop him up.
Yeah,
like if you're shoring up your team, if you're Kansas City and you let Sorensen walk and you bring in Trayvon Moehrig with Tyrann Mathieu, I mean, yes, please, come here. Like that. I mean, that is a great move. But if it's like a team like Tennessee, like we said, I mean, you look at the Vegas Raiders, who they have only drafted secondary with Damon Arnett, Trayvon Mullen, Jonathan Abram, and I mean, I think some of them still could be good players, but when you don't have a pass rush, I mean, these guys, it is a ton to ask these guys to cover for 3-4 seconds against these quarterbacks, and they just don't have the experience yet.
Yeah, I mean, it would. I mean, they could have had Josh Allen instead of Cleveland Farrell, and I mean. That took a lot of the noise off of the Giants drafting Daniel Jones that year, because Cleveland Farrell, he was consensus late teens, early 20s, and they take him at number 4. I mean that was
Josh
like, Allen on the board.
those 3 first-round picks
Yeah.
that Vegas made were as bad and as irresponsible as it gets. And like,
That was
I get
was that Mayock's first year?
Yeah, that was the year they traded Khalil Mack.
Khalil Mack.
The week before the season started, Amari Cooper midseason. They had 3 first-round picks that year. They had another 2 the next year. They get Clelin Ferrell, Josh Jacobs, and Jonathan Abram in that first year. I mean, Josh Jacobs, 2 Pro Bowl years, sure, but like, I'm not drafting a running back in that when I'm rebuilding. And he's replaceable in terms of value. You could pick up a guy in day 2 or day 3 and play near that level of Josh Jacobs, and you get Clelin Ferrell, who, as you said, was a huge reach at the time and had 2 sacks last year. I mean, he's been a disaster. And Jonathan Abram, you draft a D-back in the 21st century that can't cover. In 2021 or in 2019, you drafted a D-back that can't cover in the first round. I mean, now Mayock and Gruden are starting to kind of get under the microscope because of all the cuts they made. They really got to turn it around. We talked about it last week, but like, wow, what a flip of the narrative for the Raiders the past years.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. This is, and I was really excited about them bringing in Mike Mayock. I mean, I was one of those guys. I mean, I thought he's so much different than your Todd McShay, your Mel Kiper, your Daniel Jeremiah. He just seemed like he had more of that insider information, that he knew more about the inner workings of the NFL than some of these other guys. And I mean, I was on 2 of his conference calls, and just the way that he approached the media and spoke with the media, because you never really got to see him do much off of the NFL Network. He very rarely did external media, and I get a lot of that is because it's the NFL Network and they don't necessarily lend their talent to other outlets. But I was really excited for the prospects of what Mike Mayock could have done, and that first draft is I think going to haunt him for a little bit.
Even last year, taking Ruggs as the first receiver off the board in Arnett at 19 was a little rich. I mean, we'll see. They got to improve a lot, and they don't have 5 first-round picks in 2 years to do it.
Right. All right. Next up on our list is at 23. We already did the Jets, which they're picking at 23 in Seattle's place from the Jamal Adams trade. So we will skip that, and we will move on to number 24, the AFC North Division champion from 2020, the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this is a real trying time, I think, for a team that was as good as they were last year. This is a really weird and different offseason for them. Yeah.
As you said, they're never big free agent spenders. They're usually never in the cap trouble that they're in. Right. But this year, I mean, they're under the cap at $6 million after redoing Ben Roethlisberger's contract. They brought his cap number down to $14 million fine, but you have Ben Roethlisberger as your quarterback again next year. Not great. Marquise Pouncey retires a few weeks back. Their free agent list is long, and it is a lot of productive guys. Up till this point, I don't know if another team has as many starters as the Steelers do up for free agency. It's they got Bud Dupree, who was a tag candidate until he tore his ACL late in the year. He'll be hitting the market. Alejandro Villanueva, their starting left tackle for the past decade, he's hitting the market. Avery Williamson, who they acquired mid-year. Starting guard Matt Filer. Nickelback, one of the best in the league, Mike Hilton, Tyson Alu, who's been a nice rotational piece for them, Juju Smith-Schuster, James Conner, and Cameron Sutton at corner. I mean, it is a really long list. That's a lot of really good players for them.
Yeah, and no space to sign half of them.
No, exactly. I mean, they're going to have to do this thing through the draft.
Yeah.
They're going to have to keep being creative and continue to bring that cap number down if they want to make a couple signings here and there. But that's like half their team.
Yeah, I think they've already made it known that Juju Smith-Schuster won't be a part of the plans for 2021. I'm not sure if that's only because of the salary cap implications, or if it's because of some of the antics that we started to see last year. But that's still not necessarily, to me, a huge miss, because I think they still have two.
Oh, they're fine at receiver.
Yeah, they still have. I mean, three. When you look at
James
Washington,
James Washington's a great number 3.
But with Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, James Washington, who I was really high on coming out of Oklahoma State. I think that they're in decent position to not even have to worry about filling it even early in the draft. I think they can, if they're going to look to fill in maybe a number 4, they're going to look in this rounds 5 through 7.
That's their sweet spot. They never draft the receiver in the first round, and they always pan out.
Yeah, I mean, we saw what. Let's see. Juju was a second rounder.
Antonio Brown
was Antonio Brown, second rounder, right? Or
James Washington, third rounder.
Third round. Claypool was a third.
He was a second last year.
Second rounder last year.
I mean, their hit rate is unbelievable at receiver.
And it's funny because I saw that, although this year may not be the year, because it tends to be every other year that they hit really well. And they hit really well last year with Chase Claypool. So this may not be the year that they hit really well. But if you're a dynasty owner, try and get the wide receiver that Pittsburgh takes in the 2022 draft. But what are some positions? Obviously, you have to look in the secondary. The secondary is going to be a major issue for them to fill, and also over at left tackle.
Yeah, I mean, you can pick where you want to go. As you said, I think those are two positions that they look at in the first round. I think they look at day 2 for a running back potentially, because I don't get super excited about Anthony McFarland next year. We'll see, but they need some playmaking at offense, just because they have to be able to run the football next year the way Big Ben is. They can't expect to drop back 50 times a game and expect that formula to be sustainable. So I think it should be all about offensive line, bringing in playmakers. And to me, you keep the defense is it's always going to be fine when you have Cameron Hayward, TJ Watt, you get Devin Bush back next year. So I wouldn't be super worried about defense, at least in the early part of the draft. To me, I mean, maybe you look at corner, but you still have Joe Hayden there, who's fine. He's declining, but he's fine. You still have Micah Fitzpatrick at safety, who's great. So to me, it's got to be offense. It's got to be making things easier on Ben. To me, I would have pushed out Big Ben as nicely as I could have, because it was so ugly by the end of last year.
Yeah.
It was so ugly. I mean, how is it going to be better this year? I don't know.
The only way it's going to be better is if the elbow was never 100% during the 2020 season.
And he has to lose 20 pounds and gain 20 pounds of muscle back and lose 5 years in age, because, I mean,
maybe trim the beard a little bit.
He looks terrible. I mean, I don't know. I mean, these teams that are built around defense like Pittsburgh, your shelf life just isn't that long compared to an offensive machine.
He couldn't throw the ball more than 10 yards downfield.
No, can't move. I mean, you can't, besides catch, shape, and throw it. You can hardly drop back with the guy. It's so laboring for him to move. You can't sprint out. You can't do anything. You can't throw a screen. His mobility is that limiting. So, I mean, they have to be able to establish a run. That's what Pittsburgh has done in the past. They have to centralize their offense more about running the football.
I think that this year's class of offensive linemen is good enough that they may be able to utilize second and third rounders to build the offensive line. There's a cornerback that I think is just an ultimate Steelers pick, and it's Greg Newsom, the cornerback out of Northwestern. His pro day yesterday really opened up a lot of eyes, and I mean, he ran an unofficial 4.38, and he was part of an outstanding Northwestern defense that not enough people were talking about, and he just feels like a very Steelers pick.
He's going to be in the 20s for sure. I think a good team's going to scoop him up. He's so physically gifted. He's got the makings of a really good press corner in the National Football League, considering how long and just how fast and athletic he is. He's so twitchy. I think that's a great call. I will give you maybe a reach at 24, but I think he would be so good for them. He would be a starter there for 12 years, and that's Landon Dickerson.
Yep.
I mean, you lose Marquise Pouncey.
Yep.
David DeCastro's on the decline. I mean, you expect him back at right guard. You have Kevin Dotson at left guard. I think you plug in Landon Dickerson at center, and you have your staple of the offensive line for the next decade, and that's something you don't have to worry about later down the road. Maybe a guy like Wyatt Davis in the second round in the interior to shape out their team if they weren't to go Dickerson in the first round. But that's something they absolutely have to address. I mean, they might be at a point where they have to almost take a tackle at 24, just because the free agent market's not going to be the place that they fish. It's not. I mean, there are never good left tackles on the market. Having a guy like Trent Williams on the market's an anomaly. And they obviously can't afford that.
And the ones that are going to be on the market are going to be out of their price range.
Exactly. So, I mean, they might not have a choice. They might have to go tackle, but if not, I would love Dickerson to Pittsburgh.
Moving on, we'll be skipping number 25. That is the Jacksonville Jaguars picking in the LA Rams spot from the Jalen Ramsey trade. So we'll move on. The final two teams we'll be talking about today. First is at number 26, the rising stars of the AFC, the Cleveland Browns. 11 and 5.
Not used to them picking down here.
No,
good for them, man. Good for them.
11 and 5 record. What's this offseason look like for them?
So they have some wiggle room here. They have $24.8 million under the cap. They have some pretty good free agents coming up. They got Olivier Vernon, Kevin Johnson, and Terrence Mitchell at corner, Carl Joseph, B.J. Goodson, and Andrew Sendejo. So a lot of defense, but not a lot of guys besides Terrence Mitchell, and maybe Olivier Vernon in a team-friendly deal to be a rotational guy. But other than that, not too many guys I'm looking to bring back. And to me, it's got to be all about defense.
Yep.
This offseason for Cleveland. They got to figure out defense.
Yeah, they need to find a complement to Myles Garrett on the other side of the line. They need to bolster that secondary.
Yep.
So those are the two places that are absolute musts. And I mean, they're going to have enough cap room to fill one of those. And I would assume they would go secondary if they're looking in the free agent market. Secondary is where you're going to be able to have an easier time finding a starter at a decent price.
They just released Adrian Claiborne, freeing up, I think, around $3 or $4 million. And I think Sheldon Richardson's another very likely cut candidate. They'd save over $11 million cutting him. I think they use that money and go after a guy like Carl Lawson. I mean, can you imagine Carl Lawson with Myles Garrett?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be one of the scariest edge duos in in the entire NFL. You start there, you can build through that, and I think you can almost supplement the secondary with a lot of draft guys because you're getting back Greedy Williams, you're getting back Grant Delpit. Delpit's coming off a torn Achilles, so you can't expect the guy that you were drafting necessarily out of the gate, but I think they started edge. I think it's what you said. You start in the trenches. You already have your transcended talent in Myles Garrett. You bring in another stud on the edge because this is a really good free agent class on the edge. I think you kind of have to cash in there and you build in the draft in your defense after that.
What about someone who has been the guy that has been looked at as the savior no matter where he's been? He wouldn't have to be if he would go to Cleveland. What about someone like a Jadavian Clowney?
Ooh, It's interesting because I actually think in a weird way, Clowney would work well together with Myles Garrett because he's so dominant against the run. I mean, People scrutinize Clowney for his just meager sack numbers. They're not good. I mean, every year you want more in terms of pressuring the quarterback, but in terms of being a two-way defensive end and stopping the run, he's as stout as it gets. I mean, he'll register a ton of TFLs every year. You put that with Myles Garrett and Myles Garrett getting 15 sacks a year, that could be absolutely lethal. And you're going to get him on a discount.
What was it? I don't know if you remember. Well, you probably do. The play that really made Jadavian Clowney the name that everyone.
It's like one of the best plays ever.
That was a run play.
Yep.
It wasn't him going after a quarterback. It was him getting to the running back at the same exact time he was getting the ball and then snatching the fumble up with one hand. I mean, but that just goes to show you his prominence at playing the run. And I think it's a really good compliment to a Myles Garrett.
That's the most athletic defensive end duo like ever. I mean, it's two number one picks. It's two of the twitchiest, freakiest guys. I mean, you're getting two 260, 270-pound guys that run in the 4.5s. I mean, just in terms of intimidation.
If you're an offensive coordinator, how do you defend? How do you game plan that?
You can't run outside zone. You can't sprint out. You can't 5-step drop. I mean, you can't get comfortable at least.
That would be Kyle Shanahan's worst nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, you build that way. You bring in I'm never one for spending on linebackers, but Lamonte David did sign, which is, that hurts. But you bring in someone to shore up the middle because Malcolm Smith didn't really get it done. BJ Goodson's a fine player, but they just have to improve there. Mac Wilson's fine, but you bring in a guy like maybe KJ Wright in the middle, and you draft a corner in the first round, and that defense makes a lot more sense.
Draft. Where are we? What are we looking at with the draft? Obviously, I think it has to be BPA on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
Again, it could very well be in the range of a Gregory Rousseau, maybe outside of the range of a Kwity Paye. But Jalen Phillips, that's right in his range as well. But
Phillips' upside with Garrett would be enticing. I mean, you have to worry about the medical history.
Right.
But, in terms of on-the-field tape, Jalen Phillips is the best edge in this class, I think. I think he has the most upside. If it wasn't for his injury history, he's a top 10 pick. So if he falls in their lap at 26, I would love that pick for them.
If they decide to go secondary, what players do you think are going to be in this range that they could go after? Because it's sort of post the top three, and again, maybe outside for someone like a Greg Newsom. Are there any other guys in the secondary that you can see going in the mid to late 20s?
They're a zone-heavy team, so maybe you look in the second round at Asante Samuel Jr. Or an Aaron Robinson from UCF. I think those guys are potential starters in day one. I don't think there's a problem there. I would like them to bring back Terrence Mitchell, and you have Denzel Ward, and you pair him with an Asante Samuel Jr. That's a good secondary. You still have to probably find a safety in there and some D line help to help make a little more sense. But I mean, you can wait until the second round to pick a day one starter, in my opinion, for Cleveland.
And we will wrap up today's show with another back-to-back division rivals. We had it at 21 and 22 with the Colts and Titans. Now we get the Browns and the former Browns, the Baltimore Ravens. Again, coming off an 11-5 season. Last year was so weird for the Ravens because you're coming off of an MVP season from Lamar Jackson, and for the first 8-9 weeks of the season, you were wondering, what was this all just a fluke? Then they have the major hit with COVID, and they have to play against the Steelers after having the game pushed back 8 or 9 days, but then after that game, the lights clicked on, and they were a lot of people's choices for having the best chance at knocking off the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC playoffs.
When you look back on it, they won 5 straight. It was Dallas, Cleveland in that Monday Night Thriller, which was maybe the game of the year.
Game of the year, yep.
Yeah. It was Jacksonville Giants, and the Bengals. So maybe we're looking at them through rose-colored glasses. I still think this is a good team, but I mean, they're losing a lot. They could be losing a lot. They're $17 million under the cap, but they lose both their edge guys are going to hit the market in Yannick Ngakoue, who they acquired. They gave up a third and a fifth for him. Matthew Judon's going to hit the market. Pernell McPhee's going to hit the market. Tyus Bowser's going to hit the market. So those are your top 4 edge players all hitting the market. And you also have a guy like Willie Snead, starting center Matt Skura. So like these, I mean, that's a lot of guys you have to account for. You're not going to be able to replace them in free agency, obviously. Like a guy like Ngakoue is going to cash in somewhere. And they might be better off losing him. I think he's been a little disappointing since his 2017 run in Jacksonville, and he kind of hasn't lived up to that since. But again, like they're going to have to make their money in the draft, and they have in the past. Eric DeCosta is as good as it gets in terms of finding great value, and they usually go best player available. So I don't think it should be any different, because there are a lot of holes to fill between now and the start of the season for Baltimore.
You brought up Yannick Ngakoue, and I know that we're talking about the Ravens, but he's a guy that I think is good enough that we can talk about potential landing spots for him. And he's one of those guys where we're going to need to look at some of these teams with the most cap space. So the Jaguars, the Jets. I mean, the Jets to me make a ton of sense for a team to go after Ngakoue, a team that just has not had a producer on the edge in at least a decade.
So here's my thing with Ngakoue.
Yeah.
If I was a really good team, like maybe the Colts, but I don't think he really fits what they want to do. I mean, they don't blitz. They like stout defensive ends that can stop the run, like a Denico Audrey or a Justin Houston. That's not Ngakoue. I mean, to me, when his ears were pulled back, the other team, they're passing. You're preserving a lead in the fourth quarter. He's really good, but in terms of being maybe that complete defensive end and that like 1A top 10 rusher, I don't think he's that, but he might get paid like that. I would rather pay less money for a Carl Lawson or a Romeo Okwara. So I don't know. Like if I was the Jets, like I'm not giving Ngakoue 16 to 18 million. What do you think?
They have so much space and they got to use they got to use some of it.
Yeah.
And I think the fan base is just clamoring for somebody to be brought in that can at least give teams the fear of a potential pass rush, because they haven't even had that over the past couple of years.
Yeah. I don't know though. Like, I do like him with Quinn Williams, but I still don't. I think it's what it is at the beginning of the show. Like, you're bringing in good football players, but you're paying them like A+ players when they're really B or B- players, and that's how you get into cap hell, and that's how you
end up in the bottom right quadrant.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So like, I would. I mean, I don't know. That's not the avenue I would look down if I was one of those teams. I mean, like the Colts, he just doesn't make sense to them schematically. But I think a team that maybe,
I think he makes a ton of sense for the Giants. I just don't.
They don't have the money.
Yeah, they're not going to be able to afford him. But he would make a ton of sense with the Giants.
Yeah, I mean, let me see. What other good teams have a lot of space that we're not thinking of?
Miami.
Yeah, Miami. Yeah, I mean, you got Ogba. You got Ogba.
Washington has the opening.
I was gonna say Washington makes sense, but they have they have two studs.
Kerrigan.
Maybe the Chargers, if they were to free up a little more space, and Mike Williams, they're letting Melvin Ingram go. That makes a little bit of sense. Him and Joey Bosa. But yeah,
I mean, and to be honest, he feels he really does feel like a Patriot.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, but like them
because,
too, like
because I think he's one of those guys that Belichick can utilize in different ways and be able to scheme ways to make him more effective than he has been in certain places.
Yeah, but you drafted Josh Uche last year. You draft Anthony Jennings. You have Chase Winovich. Like, I feel like Belichick's just going to ride out his draft picks, maybe take another guy in day 2, maybe take a flyer on a low-end guy. But if he's spending big, I hope it's not on Ngakoue, because he's not versatile. He's not going to drop into coverage. He's not going to buzz in the flat like he asks his guys to do in that 3-4.
But Belichick doesn't overspend on anybody. If he gets Ngakoue, it's going to be because he has some kind of Jedi mind control.
True. I mean, the Trent Brown trade was unbelievable.
Yeah,
what a steal.
And he was able to get Ngakoue to sign for $13.5 million just because he said.
I was going to say, if we're talking about Ngakoue at $18 million, like, no, thank you. But if we're talking at him at 12 to 13 million, like, I think that's a decent starting point.
Yeah. All right. So in terms of where they need to fill holes, I mean, to me, the obviously we talked about pass rusher. I'm looking at the other side of the ball, and I'm looking at that they need a possession wide receiver. They need someone who can, and I mean, maybe you're looking at someone like a Juju Smith-Schuster. But I think they need someone who's a little bit more physical and who can be better at the underneath stuff because you need someone who can exploit a defense who is focused on Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, I feel like just every year we're going to talk about how the Ravens need to address pass catchers because they never do.
Right.
But I mean, Kenny Galladay's perfect. But he's like the ultimate prize in this free agency. He's going to get 18 to 20 million, I think, on an average annual value. I mean, they're not going to be able to afford a guy like him, but I think he would be perfect alongside Hollywood Brown. The next best option in their price range might be a Marvin Jones, and it's not sexy, but coming off
I love Marvin Jones.
Coming off that $40 million deal in Detroit, he played up to that. I mean, that was a really good signing. That's like the kind of guy they have to get. He's solid everywhere he goes. He's a great number 2, number 3 option. He is going to come down with those 50-50 balls. He is going to get his 60, 70 yards a game and produce. He's a guy that you can lean on, and that's kind of what they need. I mean, he would be a Willie Snead on steroids to me. He would just be a more dependable and a much higher upside of a guy like Willie Snead.
What about someone like Corey Davis?
You don't think that's out of their price range? I feel like him and Curtis Samuel are kind of like that.
He's one of those guys where I haven't been able to figure out what his price range is going to be. I don't know what other NFL teams are going to view Corey Davis as, because he's had 5 years in the NFL or for 17, 18, 19, 20, 20 4 years in the NFL, was not given a fifth-year option by the Titans. And it wasn't until his fourth season that he had any sort of consistent production. And that was because they brought in someone like an A.J. Brown, where it took Ryan Tannehill to be brought in to make him as successful. I'm not sure he's going to warrant, especially this year, as big a contract as some other people think he's going to get.
Yeah. I mean, I think he falls in the tier of Curtis Samuel, him, Will Fuller, like those guys that could get anywhere from 10 to 14 million, depending on the team and depending on teams bidding against one another and wanting their services, because they're all completely different receivers. But I think Corey Davis complements Hollywood Brown. I think he fills the need that they have. But I look at his fit in Tennessee. It's what you said. He didn't produce till year 4 or year 5, or year 4, because they didn't exercise his 5th year.
Right.
Which is a problem. He's a top 5 pick. So that, I mean, right there, that kind of a light goes off in your head. Like, all right, what's wrong with Corey Davis? And I mean, I think as a number 2, he's really good, but he was playing against the most 7 and 8 man boxes in football. He's playing against the most off man coverage in football. So I still think there are some question marks for a guy like Corey Davis that you're going to give 10, 12 million. I mean, if I was looking,
which is why I'm not sure he's going to get that.
I think a bad team like the Jets, that's a signing that they make. And I like Joe Douglas. Maybe not the Jets. Maybe it's not the Jets. Maybe it's someone else. But I mean, that's a signing that they make, and they overpay for Corey Davis, expecting him to get 10 targets a game and be a good receiver.
And I'm laughing, knowing that there's a very good chance that the Giants could be on the radar for him as well. So,
I mean, if I was going down that avenue and picking a guy who I think could do 80% of what Corey Davis could do for half the money, it would be Rashad Higgins.
Yeah.
You know, I think you get him for 5 or 6 million, and he could be a nice number 2 or a really good number 3, like he was in Cleveland. And that would be a nice use. That would be a good allocation of your resources.
Oh, don't tell fellow Back Sports page writer Justin Brownlow. I know he's all about making sure the Browns do not lose.
I mean,
free agency.
You retain him. You bring a speed guy in, maybe like I mean, Tony's not going to be there in day 2, but if you were to bring a guy like Estridge in day 2 in the 3rd round, that's kind of all their offense
guys in this draft.
Yeah, I mean, there's
ton of. If you're in the market for a 5'11", 190-pound wide receiver who's blazing fast, this is
Tutu Atwell.
This is your year.
Yeah. Elijah Moore, I mean, I think he should be a first-round pick. He's not
going to be because of the depth of the class.
No, but he's a speed guy, and he's an unbelievable route runner, and he's going to get the Justin Jefferson treatment. He's smaller, but he's only a slot receiver guy. I mean, he is so dynamic. If a team like the Packers scooped him up in the end of the first round, I would love that move, but that's for next week to talk about.
Yeah. All right. So that will wrap it up for today's show. Next week we will wrap up the offseason. We'll have a little bit of a clearer picture, because when we come to we'll be a couple hours into free agency. But next week we will be talking about the New Orleans Saints, the Green Bay Packers, the Buffalo Bills, the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, plus the three teams that didn't pick in the first round: the Houston Texans, the Seattle Seahawks, and the LA Rams. Hopefully, we'll be able to get Ric Serritella from the NFL Draft Bible on next week. I know there ended up being some sort of issue, so hopefully we'll be able to bring you that as well. Make sure you are checking out backsportspage.com for all of the great content that's going up, including the great stuff that we got going on with the scouting reports. We've got a great group of writers that are putting out amazing work. Make sure you're checking that out. Derek is on Twitter at Derek Mountain. I'm at rstern33. Backsports Page is everywhere at Backsports Page. Make sure you are following. Derek, we will wrap it up next week, and then it's all about the draft and draft only for about a month. I can't wait.
I'll take it.
All right, let's do this again next week. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will see you later.